Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers.
I can't tell you how excited I am to be on right now. It's been a couple of weeks of excitement getting prepared, and I've done a lot of things in my life, but this has got to be close to the top.
Thank you, and Reader's Magnet, and thank you, John, for putting this forth and taking the chance on our authors in presenting this out to the world.
I've enjoyed this immensely, Joanne.
Ellie, so have I. Thank you for who you are, and thank you, Reader's Magnet. You all are beautiful, and you've worked so very hard, and we are blessed.
We are.
I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers. We thank Reader's Magnet and everybody that's involved. I love Reader's Magnet. They say, we share your stories with the world.
Hello, good evening. Welcome back. For those of you who have listened on other previous nights, going back to last week, and for those who have tuned in tonight for the first time, welcome. I want to thank Reader's Magnet for giving me this opportunity to showcase my books and talk a little bit about my writing for this Festival of Storytellers. It's been a blast. Something that I was a little nervous at the beginning, but hopefully I'm getting a little more relaxed and everything. So tonight what I thought I would do is read a few poems. I know the last couple nights that I did read a few of the poems. As I had mentioned, my Raven novel, both Raven novels and The Reptilian Factor start with a poem and end with a poem. Obviously, the Raven series being about werewolves and vampires running through the night is dark poetry. But as a poet and having written poetry going back a number of years, poetry is not always dark. My love for horror sometimes leads me to that. But I do enjoy writing poetry of all types and all styles. And so my actually my first book of poetry, which was published a number of years ago, is A Sea of Emotion. And it's a book of poetry that takes the reader on a ride of normal everyday life and love to those dark periods in a person's life. My other book of poetry, just recently released, is Along a Burning Highway. That is a combination of poetry that starts out okay and then gets pretty dark. And there are also 10 short stories. And at the end, there is the first chapter of Raven's Way and Raven's Rage. Before I start to read, this is a copy of Raven's Way with the cover, the city of Philadelphia in the background, and those deciding to come out at the full moon. And the follow-up is Raven's Rage, Order of the Claw. And my science fiction horror novel is The Reptilian Factor, which takes place in Tucson, Arizona. The Raven series takes place in Philadelphia. And they are all available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble as paperback and also ebook. I do have copies of the books here at my house to sign and mail out if you're that interested that you would like something autographed. You just need to contact me through Facebook. Just Kerry Marzock, author. I actually have 2 pages out there, so either way, I would find you. So tonight, what I want to do here is read 3 poems from A Sea of Emotion. And the other night, I spoke about the first chapter of Raven's Rage when I read it, which is takes place between Philadelphia and Lancaster on a side road, Route 311, and there is a young Amish couple going along in a horse and buggy, and unfortunately they meet a rather angry werewolf. But not all poetry is dark. So driving home one time on 311 is what gave me the idea of that first chapter in Raven's Rage. Driving home that same route, which I took a lot between Philadelphia and Lancaster, it also gave me I was coming home one weekend, and obviously it's Amish country, so there are large farming fields on both sides of the road. And as I was driving home one day, I glanced over to this one field and I saw these scarecrows. And something popped into my head, and by the time I got home, I nearly had this poem written. So I'm going to read it now. Hope you enjoy it. It is called The Scarecrow Waltz. An enraptured moon of pumpkin harvest orange gently caressed the fields with a soothing lunar flow. Early winter now picked clean by sleeping farmers and a flock of overly fat but sassy crows. Upon the stroke of midnight, lonely clouds shall dance, while a glittering chorus of stars sing in perfect harmonies. It's time for anxious lovers to cast a wistful glance and let their deep desires sail upon romantic seas. He hung forlornly upon a cross of wooden sticks, this man of yellow straw and tattered clothes. Waiting patiently all year, he stared through eyes transfixed at a lonely figure clad in a torn dress of faded primrose. She stared back with urgent longing at this man within her dreams. A long and lonely year gone by without feeling his tender touch. The tingling rush of fingertips like soft and velvet moonbeams, or the whispering caress of lips that they sorely miss so much. At midnight, stardust rained down from an amber-painted sky, glowing brightly in a breathtaking display of sparkling tears. 2 rekindled heartbeats sharing a note of grateful sighs, their eyes alive to dance on yet another New Year's Eve. Frayed shirt, ragged pants, and straw hat were now replaced with a tuxedo of brilliant black and satin lapels. Moving quickly across the field, he held her slender waist to welcome her inviting lips to his, entranced within her spell. Lush auburn hair cascaded softly down around her breasts, the blue silk of her gown whispering a quiet, "I love you." Dancing to the scarecrows, he held her to his chest within a tight embrace, praying this night would but continue. Just one sweet waltz this evening was all they were allowed to dance. With the music sadly fading, they slowly returned to their places. But right before their eyes went shut, they cast a tearful glance to see their loving smiles still etched upon their faces. Another one I wrote, and I almost wrote this also as soon as I woke up. It was dark. I woke up at night. I had the TV on, and there was a music channel playing. And when I woke up, there was this beautiful piano song that I just loved and could not get out of my head. So I turned on the light at the side of the bed, grabbed a piece of paper, and I wrote out this poem. It's short, not long, called Piano Nights. Sometimes when I lie alone, eyes tightly closed, I can hear the piano keys of my life, ivory white in their brilliance, solemnly black under subdued silence, tastefully melodic within such sweet perfection, angrily raging over misconstrued abstraction, and yet sadly out of tune, missing a beat here and there, nervous fingertips running up and down lonesome arpeggios, teardrops reaching to who knows where, flats of purple haze, sharps of graying days, softly singing moonbeams sigh to the melody of unrequited goodbyes. The fading blues of love's unfinished symphony dies out in my haunted eyes. But when I cry for only you. So that is a few poems, not dark, not about werewolves or vampires, but I can't get away from the horror for very long. So the other night I read a poem from the back of Raven's Rage, which was titled Shadow of a Beast. And Shadow of a Beast actually developed into a short story. That short story is in Along a Burning Highway. So let me go ahead and read this and hopefully enjoy it. In the Shadow of a Beast. As my fingertips angrily struck the keys, I could see the strangest of shadows dancing across the bookshelf to my right. It seemed to oddly resemble a very long, narrow hand, somewhat other than human, possessing sharp claws where fingernails should have rightfully been. It's quite ironic how the mind can play deranged games with one's incredible imagination, especially when that person has not slept in nearly 48 hours. Existing on nothing but large mugs of very strong black coffee and surfing upon waves of insomnia that would not allow me to sleep, I continued to pound away at the keyboard, hour after interminable hour. There was just an insane driving force to finish this latest novel. In fact, I had never in my life poured out the words so fast or written in such graphic, terrifying detail. However, what frightened me the most was this nagging feeling that for some reason I was not alone in creating this nightmarish tale. I shudder to think who I might be collaborating with. I was also completely aware, without even opening the front door to the porch and staring up at the nighttime sky, that a full moon hung high. The persistent itching underneath my skin, like I was being devoured on the inside by marauding termites, clearly heralded the moon's call to me. Just like last month and the month before, muscles throughout my body had begun humming so loud it became unbearable, to the point where at times I covered my ears with shaking hands. Quite frankly, it didn't help because the noise was coming from within, a symphonic crescendo building towards a deafening clash of cymbals and kettle drums. Suddenly, a sharp stabbing pain pierced my stomach and shot like a hot flame up my spine. I cried out in anguish, bending over towards the desk, my hands and fingers clutching for keys that weren't there, curling into what resembled the paws of some wretched beast. The tips of claws broke through the skin of my fingers and began to extend outward, curving at the ends and scratching at the keyboard, as if the beast wanted to type a bloody, monstrous paragraph. What lost shreds of humanity I still precariously clung to, I recalled that horrendous night 3 or 4 months ago, maybe longer, possibly shorter. I couldn't tell anymore because time simply was not what it used to be. As my heels clicked briskly across the lonely sidewalk edging the northern side of Rittenhouse Square, I was rather somewhat apprehensive and more than a little nervous. Fortunately enough, I had found a parking place relatively close to the bar, where I had met several close friends for a late dinner and cocktails. However, the stark headlines from the Philadelphia Inquirer over the past few months still cried out to me and other Philadelphians, with stories of savage murders occurring, mostly around the moon. A note from Dorothy Williams. Good to see you today. Thanks, Dorothy. Great to see you also. I glanced up to see that big yellow orb suspended right above me. I swallowed hard and grasped the strap of my purse tighter. Looking at my watch, I took note that it was nearly midnight. Picking up the pace and getting to the car in one piece was now my only desire. In my nervous hand, perspiring even on this frigid evening, was clutched a canister of mace, and I would not hesitate in the least to use it. I might not be the most aggressive individual, but if my life was in extreme danger, I would fight like a hellcat, if I was fast enough, that is. But I wasn't. Whatever the devilish creature was that sprung from the bushes, it hurtled towards me with blinding speed. The roar was totally deafening, and I screamed loud enough to wake the dead. I don't know which was louder, but it didn't matter as the beast struck my side violently, slamming me to the pavement. I felt razor-sharp claws rake my left shoulder and fangs that should not have belonged to any living creature sink deeply into my right arm. The pain was immediate and intense, but I was actually more stunned with the suddenness of the attack. I pushed and struggled as best I could against the massive weight that seemed to be crushing the air from my lungs. I was unable to scream for lack of oxygen, so I gasped and whimpered with what breath remained. I felt that in seconds I would be dead anyway. And then, as fast as it had started, it ended just as abruptly. The monstrous body, covered with stinking matted fur and possessing wretched, fetid breath that had pounced upon me so savagely, was suddenly gone. Its roar and my scream still echoed against high-rise buildings surrounding the square as I lay sprawled on the sidewalk, dazed and fighting desperately to hold on to sanity. Several streams of blood flowed from my shoulder and arm, staining the white pavement red. After 2 days in the hospital, the doctor signed me out, expressing some medical disbelief that I could heal so quickly. I couldn't explain it either because I had seen the ugly wounds on my body and was extremely worried about infections and rabies. Yet even while I was lying in the emergency room, the pain miraculously began to disappear. The police questioned me while I floated in and out of consciousness. They stared at me with raised eyebrows, as if my story was quite preposterous. A monster, indeed. They said it must have been a very large dog, but I knew otherwise. Unless this mutt came straight from hell, it was much more powerful and vicious than any old domestic Fido could have ever been. Smiling, I thought of a gigantic poodle with slobbering fangs and murderous claws. However, now my fractured life had become cruelly ruled by a cycle of full moons that coincidentally appeared about every 29.5 days. The closer I got to D-Day, the more anxious and paranoid I became. It wasn't a form of anxiety that I longed for either, as if you were waiting impatiently for a hot lover to come into your arms. Oh no, this was more like a storm of insidious fear, the type of which I had never experienced before. Added to the fact that I clearly lost any memory of what happened on those frightful nights, the pain, the terror, the deep urgency from which the moon's clutches enveloped me pushed any threads of sanity to the farthest and darkest edges of my once normal existence. Any semblance of humanity disappeared completely and was evilly replaced by the sinister, voracious, feral mind of a wild and uncontrollable beast. More pain pierced and jabbed at my bones and muscles, skin seeming to rip apart like paper mache. What I feared the most was hidden underneath. In a gut-wrenching jolt, my spine cracked and bent, popping loudly as a vertebrae altered to where it no longer appeared human in form. I lifted my head towards the ceiling and moaned or whined, not actually sure what came out. Sounds were no longer what I remembered them as being, for my ears seemed longer now, much more sensitive and alert to danger, as well as prey. I could hear the terrified heartbeats of little animals and sensed their sweet, delicious fear. I opened my eyes only to strangely gaze through varied shades of gray with intermittent flashes of brilliant color. What I saw sent icy chills up and down my uttering spine. Fingertips of shadow slithered like a serpent over the keyboard, caressing the dark brown wooden surface of my desk. Startled, I noticed that they were elongated and sharp, like claws of the creature, the fanged and furry beast that I write about, the beast that always has and will forever haunt my fractured dreams. It had been those dreams and imagination that created my stories. Now I wasn't quite sure if it was that alone. Glancing through red, sleep-deprived eyes, I saw long hairs upon my hands, springing from every pore in my skin. Through the pain and torment of shifting shape, I tasted salty liquid upon my long, flickering tongue. I made a mewling sound as I realized it was tears, maybe all that was left of my humanity. Standing precariously upon bent legs, I violently shoved the chair out from underneath me and glanced to my right. Now upon the bookshelf was the unmistakable shadow of a beast, possibly a wolf, its muzzle long and narrow, ears somewhat rounded, but coming to a point, curved fangs showing clearly as the mouth snapped open and closed. The rear window in the den was open, a chilly evening air spilling into the room, with a host of interesting sounds and tantalizing scents calling out to the beast. As the creature's paw lit upon the ground, the city streets of Philadelphia were soon filled with the howling of a wild and feral animal. Most individuals hearing the haunting lament from a distance swore it had to be a dog, and yet it clearly sounded like a wolf. But they simply did not exist in the city of brotherly love. At least that's what any normal person would think. If they were too close to the howling, then they could very well find out the hard way, staring up at the moon with disbelieving eyes. At some point the next morning I awoke, stretching my painful limbs and moaning quite loudly. Blessed sleep had come at last, but at what expense? Strangely, I found myself lying on the floor atop a round throw rug, a plush white robe tightly hugging my quivering body. Standing slowly, I began to stagger somewhat to the kitchen, where I poured whatever coffee was left in the bottom of the pot into an unwashed mug from the kitchen sink. The coffee was cold, but I didn't care. I just needed caffeine and lots of it. Wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, I shuffled to the front door and squinted as the light pierced deep behind my eyes. I quickly reached for the newspaper and rushed back inside the darker confines of the living room. Too frightened to actually look at the headlines yet, I moved slowly back to the kitchen in order to brew a larger pot of coffee. As I listened to the steady percolating sound of the coffee machine, I glanced down at my feet, where I saw blood splattered across the toes and ankles. Lifting my hands, I detected long red hairs still clinging to my skin, and my nails were much longer and sharper than I ever remembered them being. Moving to the farther wall, I nervously stared into a small mirror. Opening my mouth, I glimpsed teeth that were not fangs, but still longer and sharper than normal for a mere human. Pain rolled through my stomach, and I doubled over at the waist, this time through the agony. This time, though, the agony was not from altering joints, but instead the sickening realization of what I possibly had become. Even more terrifying was what I had done in order to have blood on my feet, and as I quickly noted other places as well. Before the pain subsided, I was on my knees and retching uncontrollably into the trash can. I vomited until my stomach muscles were tied in knots and nothing else came out. Standing slowly, teetering on very shaky legs, I staggered blindly into the living room where I had left the Inquirer. Fearing the worst, I spread the paper on the coffee table and stared, my eyes widening and a sobbing sound escaping my chest and parched throat. Startled, horrified, and utterly sickened, the headline screamed back at me. Young couple slain in Fairmount Park. Witnesses swear they saw a large, wolf-like creature. I placed my head in my hands and whispered, "Oh, dear God, please forgive me for what sins I may have committed." Then I happened to glance at the corner of the newspaper and noticed that the date was from 2 days ago. I must have been unconscious for up to a full day, maybe more. Tripping and stumbling towards the desk, seemingly my only safe haven, I brought up my latest manuscript that I had been working on. I waited with bitter disquietude, fearful of what I might see. Suddenly the stark manuscript appeared, and with a breaking heart, I read of murder, death, and mayhem in Fairmount Park. The title of the manuscript read, "In the Shadow of a Beast." Closing my eyelids to the burning realization that I could in fact be the creature responsible for these deaths, I began to shake and moan. I prayed that I would fall asleep and never awake, no more words of death to be typed or ever read again. But deep down inside me was the voice of a wolf, a voracious monster. Open your eyes and write about us, about me, about the urge to kill and run as the beast. The voice was low, guttural, seemed to come from inside me, and yet not. I lifted my arms and let my fingertips begin striking the keyboard, for I had a novel to finish. Perhaps it would be completed before the next full moon. If not, then death would be the final chapter, for within the feral eyes of the beast, there was only one way: violence. And that, girls and boys, is your nighttime story. If you want to bring up those questions again, there were a few questions, I think, if I still have time to answer them. So, as you can imagine, my mind can be quite dark at times. But I think that's the way horror writers write. But I do write short stories that aren't dark, aren't human. I'm not sure how much time I have left. I think it might be coming to a close. I haven't got a notice yet. But anyway, I hope everyone had a good time if you were listening in. Again, the Raven series, there will be a third Raven novel. I'm working on it now, called Raven Unleashed. And okay, Nikki says I have 3 more minutes. So I hope you enjoyed tonight's session. I will have to figure out what to do tomorrow night. Someone had asked me possibly maybe reading chapter 3 or chapter 4 of Raven's Way. I might read chapter 4 because that's where I introduce the rogue werebeast. So again, I think someone had asked where I get my ideas for my werewolves. I have been an avid reader of horror all my life, going back to when I first, as a child, could first start reading these books. And uh, Alice, how did you come up with this beast for your story, Kerry? Well, Johnny Raven is part of a secret society of wolves called Wergun, and Johnny. It was funny because Johnny Raven, the name Johnny Raven, just popped into my head even before I started writing the book, and and about 3 days later, it kept coming and coming, and other thoughts kept coming. I wrote a 3-page outline, put the outline away. 6 months later, I found the outline, and I read it, and I just started writing it. And Johnny Raven was born. And I follow certain writers. I love Laurel K. Hamilton and her Anita Blake series. It's just fantastic. And I just love how she weaves characters in and out, werewolves and vampires and everything, which is something that I've been doing for a long time myself. So, again, the third novel will be Raven Unleashed. And at the end of Raven's Rage, some things happen, and also at the beginning that sets Johnny off. Dorothy Williams, what was the best writing advice you received while writing these books? I think it was just a matter of stick to it, don't give up. Raven's Way was my first novel. And after I read that outline a couple times, I just said to myself, if I don't write it or start writing it, I'm never going to know if I can write it. So my suggestion to anybody out there who thinks maybe they can write or they have an idea for a novel, but they don't know if they can write one, all I can say is you never know if you don't try. And of course, what's the worst that can happen? Maybe it just ends up as a short story. Maybe it ends up as a chapbook or a novella. Sometimes it's pretty hard to get through a 400-page novel. Raven's Way took me 6 months. Raven's Rage took me 2 years. Reptilian Factor probably took me about 1.5 years. So, writing, working full time and then writing, you have to kind of categorize everything. Helen Richardson, do you think you ever get tired of writing? Absolutely not, Helen. It's in me. I think I have 4 novels that are started right now. I think my closest one to getting finished will be my first fantasy titled Scrolls of Sorrow. That's a little over 100 pages done, and I'm going to probably be working on that. And then that will be followed by the 3rd Raven novel. But I love it. One thing that I have found turning over to writing fiction is that I don't write poetry like I used to. It's a different genre, and my mind is thinking more of plot and setting and dialogue and action. So that's it for tonight. I think we're done. I hope everyone had a great time. I had a good time, and I'll be on tomorrow night from 6:30 to 7. Good night, everybody.